Hey guys, tonight we're exploring the unglamorous reality of being a medieval knight, a job that sounds impressive until you realize it involved wearing 60 pounds of metal in the summer heat, spending most of your time doing paperwork instead of fighting dragons, and having a life expectancy that made medieval peasants look like they had excellent career prospects. From dealing with armor that made going to the bathroom a two-person operation to discovering that chivalry was mostly a marketing campaign, this is the story of humanity's most overrated profession. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Medieval armor looks impressive in museum displays and Hollywood movies, but wearing it was like being trapped inside a metal oven that weighed more than a modern refrigerator and offered about as much mobility as a refrigerator would provide. A full suit of plate armor could weigh between 50 to 70 pounds, which doesn't sound terrible until you realize you had to wear it for hours while riding horses, fighting battles, and pretending to be a noble warrior instead of a sweaty, claustrophobic person having a panic attack inside a metal can. Getting dressed in armor was a daily ordeal that required at least one assistant and could take over an hour to complete properly. The process began with multiple layers of padded clothing designed to prevent the metal from rubbing directly against skin, creating outfits that made knights look like overstuffed medieval marshmallows before the actual armor was even added. Each piece had to be attached in the correct sequence, with straps, buckles, and ties that could easily malfunction at the worst possible moments. The helmet was particularly problematic because it severely limited vision and hearing while creating a humid microclimate around the knight's head that fogged up any eye slits and made breathing feel like trying to get oxygen through a metal straw. Many knights chose between being able to see clearly and being adequately protected, since raising the visor for better visibility left the face completely exposed to arrows, swords, and other unfriendly projectiles. Ventilation in medieval armor was essentially non-existent, creating internal temperatures that could reach dangerous levels during physical activity or warm weather. Knights regularly suffered from heat exhaustion, dehydration, and heat stroke while wearing their protective gear, making the armor almost as dangerous as the enemies it was designed to defend against. Summer battles were particularly brutal, with knights literally cooking inside their metal shells while trying to swing heavy weapons and control war horses. Bathroom breaks while wearing armor required advanced planning and significant assistance from squires, who had to help with the complex process of removing enough pieces to make basic bodily functions possible. This created logistical challenges during long battles or extended periods in armor, leading to situations that medieval chroniclers were too polite to document, but which probably involved considerable personal discomfort and hygiene issues. Armor maintenance was a constant, time-consuming job that required daily cleaning, oiling, and inspection to prevent rust, corrosion, and mechanical failure of joints and fastenings. A single rainstorm could create rust problems that took hours to address, while battle damage required expensive repairs by skilled armorers who charged premium prices for their specialized services. Knights spent more time maintaining their armor than actually fighting in it. The weight distribution of armor created chronic back, shoulder, and joint problems for career knights who spent years carrying the extra weight. Medieval medicine had no understanding of repetitive stress injuries or ergonomic design, so knights simply accepted chronic pain as an occupational hazard that came with the job. Many older knights walked with permanent stoops and joint stiffness from decades of wearing poorly fitted armor. Falling down while wearing armor was catastrophic because the weight and bulk made it nearly impossible to get back up without assistance. Knights who fell during battle often became sitting ducks for enemy soldiers who could attack them leisurely while they struggled helplessly on the ground like overturned turtles. This vulnerability led to specialized battlefield techniques for helping fallen comrades while protecting oneself from becoming similarly helpless. Swimming in armor was obviously impossible, making any water deeper than a few inches potentially fatal for fully armored knights. River crossings and naval operations required complete armor removal, leaving knights vulnerable during the extended time needed to undress and redress on the other side. Many knights drowned during military campaigns when they fell into water while wearing their protective gear. The psychological effects of wearing armor included claustrophobia, sensory deprivation, and social isolation caused by the physical barriers between knights and the world around them. Communication became difficult when voices were muffled by helmets and facial expressions were completely hidden, creating interpersonal challenges that affected battlefield coordination and social relationships. Customization of armor for individual knights was expensive and time-consuming, but necessary for proper fit and function. Poorly fitted armor created pressure points, restricted movement, and increased injury risk, but custom armor could cost more than a modern house and required multiple fittings with skilled craftsmen. Most knights made do with armor that fit adequately rather than perfectly. The social expectations around armor created pressure for knights to maintain appearances even when their armor was uncomfortable, damaged, or inappropriate for the conditions. Removing armor in public could be seen as cowardice or weakness, forcing knights to endure physical discomfort to maintain their reputation and social status. The armor became both protection and prison, defining the knight's identity while limiting their freedom and comfort. Technological improvements in armor design were slow and uneven, with innovations taking decades to spread between different regions and social classes. Knights often used outdated armor designs long after better alternatives were available, either due to cost constraints or conservative attitudes about change. Progress in armor technology was measured in generations rather than years. The romantic image of knights in shining armor was largely mythological, since actual combat armor quickly became dented, scratched, and stained with blood, mud, and other battlefield debris. Maintaining the polished appearance required constant work by servants and was impractical during active military campaigns.
Medieval warfare was less about glorious single combat and heroic charges than about standing around in uncomfortable armor waiting for something to happen, digging trenches, guarding supply wagons, and engaging in siege warfare that could last for months without a single exciting moment. Knights spent far more time doing military bureaucracy than actual fighting, creating careers that combined the worst aspects of office work with the constant threat of violent death. Castle sieges represented the most common form of medieval warfare, involving weeks or months of tedious blockade tactics designed to starve defenders into submission rather than dramatic assault operations. Knights participating in sieges spent their days maintaining siege equipment, rotating guard duties, and preventing supply convoys from reaching the besieged castle. The actual fighting was minimal compared to the endless waiting and routine maintenance work. Siege engines required constant maintenance and operation by teams of knights and soldiers who spent their time loading stones, adjusting tension on catapult arms, and moving heavy machinery into position. These weapons were medieval industrial equipment that demanded the same kind of routine operation and maintenance as factory machinery, creating military service that resembled manual labor more than heroic warfare. Supply line protection was a crucial but unglamorous military duty that involved escorting wagon trains, guarding food depots, and maintaining communication routes between castles and army camps. Knights assigned to supply duties spent weeks traveling dusty roads at the pace of heavily loaded ox carts, defending grain shipments and replacement weapons from bandits and enemy raiding parties. Military engineering projects required knights to participate in construction work that included digging ditches, building fortifications, and constructing temporary bridges across rivers and ravines. These projects could take months to complete and required the same kind of physical labor that knights supposedly were too noble to perform in civilian life. War turned aristocrats into construction workers with expensive equipment. Weather conditions affected military operations more than enemy action, with campaigns frequently delayed or canceled due to rain, snow, mud, or extreme temperatures that made movement impossible and fighting impractical. Knights spent considerable time sitting in tents, waiting for weather to improve, while their horses, equipment, and supplies deteriorated in adverse conditions that could last for weeks. Disease killed more medieval soldiers than combat, with camps serving as incubators for dysentery, typhus, and other infectious diseases that spread rapidly among men living in close quarters with poor sanitation. Knights were as vulnerable to camp diseases as common soldiers, and their expensive training and equipment provided no protection against microscopic enemies that medieval medicine couldn't identify or treat. Military discipline in medieval armies was inconsistent and often ineffective, with knights maintaining their aristocratic attitudes and personal loyalties even when serving under military command. This created command structure problems when noble knights refused to take orders from commanders they considered social inferiors, leading to coordination failures and tactical disasters that could have been avoided with better discipline. Intelligence gathering involved sending knights on reconnaissance missions that required riding alone through hostile territory to observe enemy movements and defensive preparations. These missions were dangerous and often unsuccessful, since knights in armor were easily spotted and had difficulty gathering detailed information without being detected and captured by enemy forces. Prisoner management after battles required knights to guard, transport, and negotiate ransoms for captured enemies who might be held for months while their families raised money for their release. This created ongoing responsibilities that extended far beyond the actual fighting and could tie up knights and resources for extended periods without providing military benefit. Administrative duties in military campaigns included keeping records of equipment, supplies, casualties, and expenses that had to be reported to higher authorities and used for planning future operations. Knights with literacy skills often found themselves assigned to paperwork duties that kept them away from combat but required long hours of tedious record-keeping and correspondence writing. Training exercises and drill practice consumed significant time during military campaigns, as commanders attempted to maintain fighting readiness and unit coordination. These exercises were repetitive and boring, involving the same formations and movements practiced hundreds of times until they became automatic responses rather than conscious tactical decisions. Equipment maintenance and repair required constant attention from knights and their support personnel, with weapons needing sharpening, armor requiring cleaning and adjustment, and horses demanding daily care and exercise. These maintenance activities consumed more time than actual combat and required technical skills that many knights had to learn through trial and error during their military service. Communication challenges in medieval armies included difficulties coordinating between units spread across large areas without modern communication technology. Knights served as messengers, carrying orders between commanders, riding long distances through dangerous territory to deliver information that might be outdated by the time it arrived at its destination. The actual fighting, when it occurred, was brief, chaotic, and often decisive, rather than the prolonged heroic duels depicted in romantic literature. Most combat encounters lasted minutes rather than hours, with victory determined more by preparation, positioning, and luck than individual fighting skill or personal courage.
Being a knight was essentially running a small military business that required enormous startup costs, ongoing operational expenses, and uncertain revenue streams that could disappear overnight due to political changes, military defeat, or economic downturns affecting the feudal system. Knights were military contractors who had to provide their own equipment, training, and support personnel while hoping their services remained in demand. The initial investment required to become a knight included purchasing armor, weapons, horses, and support equipment that could cost the equivalent of several modern luxury cars. A full suit of quality armor alone might represent years of a skilled craftsman's wages, while war horses were expensive animals that required specialized training and ongoing care that added significant recurring costs to knightly operations. Maintaining multiple horses was essential, since war horses could be injured, killed, or exhausted during military campaigns, requiring knights to keep backup mounts that represented additional investment and ongoing expenses. Horses needed daily feeding, medical care, and specialized equipment, including saddles, bridles, and protective gear that required regular replacement and repair by skilled craftsmen. Weapon costs included not just the initial purchase of swords, lances, and other equipment, but ongoing maintenance, repair, and replacement as weapons were damaged or lost during combat. Quality weapons were handcrafted by master smiths, who charged premium prices for their work, and knights typically needed multiple weapons for different combat situations and ceremonial occasions. Support personnel expenses included wages for squires, grooms, armorers, and other specialists who maintained the knight's equipment and assisted with daily operations. A successful knight might employ several full-time servants whose salaries, food, and lodging represented significant ongoing costs that continued even when the knight wasn't actively campaigning or earning military income. Travel expenses for military campaigns included food, lodging, and supplies for the knight and his entourage during journeys that could last weeks or months. Medieval travel was expensive and time-consuming, with costs multiplying when moving groups of people and animals across long distances while maintaining the supplies and equipment necessary for military operations. Income sources for knights were limited and uncertain, depending primarily on land rents from feudal holdings, military wages from lords or kings, and ransom payments from captured enemies. These revenue streams could fluctuate dramatically based on agricultural conditions, political stability, and military success, creating financial insecurity that affected even successful knights. Land management responsibilities required knights to supervise agricultural operations, collect rents from tenants, and maintain properties that generated the income needed to support their military activities. This created dual careers as both warriors and estate managers, with administrative duties that often conflicted with military obligations and required completely different skill sets. Debt was a constant concern for many knights who borrowed money to finance equipment purchases, military campaigns, and lifestyle expenses that exceeded their irregular income. Interest rates were high and creditors unforgiving, leading to situations where knights could lose their lands, equipment, and social status due to financial difficulties that spiraled out of control. Inheritance issues affected knightly families when estates had to be divided among multiple heirs, or when economic conditions changed between generations. Younger sons often struggled to maintain knightly status without adequate land holdings to support the expenses, leading to career changes or reduced social status that affected entire family lines. Insurance against loss was non-existent in medieval times, meaning knights bore complete personal financial risk for equipment damage, horse injuries, and other operational hazards that could destroy years of investment in a single campaign. Military defeat could mean total financial ruin, with no safety net or compensation system to help recovery. Economic competition between knights created pressure to maintain appearances and equipment standards that could exceed practical necessity, leading to spending arms races where knights invested in increasingly expensive gear to maintain their reputation and competitive advantage in military and social markets. Career longevity was limited by physical demands and injury risks that could end a knight's active military service before he had accumulated sufficient wealth for comfortable retirement. Medieval medicine couldn't repair serious injuries, making disability a constant threat to long-term financial security.
The social obligations of knighthood created constant pressure to maintain appearances, attend ceremonial functions, and participate in political activities that had nothing to do with military service, but were essential for maintaining status and access to the networks that provided economic opportunities and social protection within the feudal system.
Court attendance required knights to spend weeks or months at royal or noble courts, participating in elaborate ceremonies, political discussions, and social events that served networking functions but involved extensive time away from home and significant expenses for appropriate clothing, gifts, and entertainment that demonstrated wealth and cultural sophistication. Feudal obligations included military service requirements that could be called upon with little notice, disrupting agricultural schedules and personal plans for extended periods. Knights owed specific amounts of military service to their lords, typically 40 days per year, but these obligations could be extended during emergencies or major campaigns that lasted much longer. Legal responsibilities as landowners required knights to serve as judges in local courts, resolve disputes between tenants, and enforce laws that affected their territories. These judicial duties required knowledge of complex legal traditions and the ability to make fair decisions that maintained social order while protecting the interests of all parties involved. Religious obligations included regular church attendance, participation in religious festivals, and support for monastic institutions that provided spiritual services and social stability within medieval communities. Knights were expected to demonstrate piety and support church activities through both personal participation and financial contributions that represented significant ongoing expenses. Marriage negotiations involved complex political considerations rather than personal preference, with knightly families arranging unions that strengthened military alliances, combined land holdings, or provided access to important social networks. These arranged marriages often created personal unhappiness while serving broader family and political objectives that took priority over individual desires. Child education responsibilities required knights to provide appropriate training for their sons and daughters, including military instruction, academic learning, and social skills that would prepare them for adult roles in the aristocratic class. This education was expensive and time-consuming, often involving sending children to other noble households for specialized training. Household management included supervising domestic staff, maintaining buildings and equipment, and organizing the complex logistics required to support a knightly lifestyle that involved multiple properties, seasonal movements, and extensive social obligations that affected entire extended families and servant communities. Political intrigue was an unavoidable aspect of knightly life that required careful navigation of competing loyalties, changing alliances, and complex relationships that could shift rapidly based on military outcomes, marriages, deaths, and other events beyond individual control. Wrong political choices could result in loss of lands, exile, or execution. Aging brought particular challenges for knights whose identity and income depended on physical capabilities that deteriorated with time and injury. Older knights faced difficult transitions from active military service to advisory roles that provided less income and social status while requiring different skills and relationships than their previous careers had developed. The reality of knightly life contrasted sharply with romantic ideals of chivalry, honor, and adventure that were promoted in literature and popular culture. Most knights spent their time managing mundane administrative and economic responsibilities rather than engaging in the heroic activities that defined their legendary reputation. As we settle into our modern beds with central heating and comfortable clothing, there's something both amusing and sobering about the gap between medieval knightly fantasies and the sweaty,
expensive, bureaucratic reality of actually trying to make a living as an armored warrior in an age before modern conveniences made daily life manageable. Tomorrow, when we easily control our environment, manage our finances digitally, and pursue careers based on personal interest rather than feudal obligation, we can appreciate both our freedom from the constraints that made medieval knighthood more burden than privilege, and the remarkable determination of people who chose to pursue honor and adventure despite the considerable personal costs involved in maintaining such a demanding and ultimately unsustainable lifestyle.
Welcome back to our exploration of medieval life's unexpected complications. Tonight, we're examining one of the most iconic symbols of medieval warfare, armor itself, and discovering why the protection that could save a knight's life could just as easily kill him. From suits of steel that turned warriors into mobile ovens during summer campaigns, to armor so expensive it bankrupted entire family estates, this is the story of how medieval technology created solutions that came with their own deadly problems. So settled into your most comfortable position, perhaps appreciating the freedom of movement you currently enjoy, and let me know in the comments what modern solutions you think create their own unexpected problems, because we're about to spend the next 40 minutes discovering that medieval armor was simultaneously the best and worst thing that could happen to a medieval warrior. You are Sir Edmund de Montfort, a knight in service to the Earl of Warwick, circa 1450 CE, where your survival depends entirely on a suit of plate armor that weighs more than most people and costs more than most farmers earn in a lifetime. Welcome to your daily struggle with technology designed to save your life, while making every aspect of that life significantly more difficult, uncomfortable, and occasionally life-threatening in ways the armorers never intended. The morning light filters through the narrow windows of your chamber, illuminating the suit of plate armor that dominates the room like a steel sculpture of human ambition and engineering compromise. The polished metal gleams with the deceptive beauty of craftsmanship that masks the daily reality of wearing 60 pounds of steel plates that transform a human body into something resembling a mobile fortress with severe mobility limitations. The complexity of medieval armor goes far beyond simple metal protection. This is wearable architecture, a sophisticated system of interlocking plates, joints, and fasteners that must provide complete protection while allowing enough movement for combat effectiveness. Every piece must fit perfectly with every other piece, creating an engineering challenge that rivals cathedral construction in its technical demands and potential for catastrophic failure. But here's the thing that makes armor both blessing and curse. The same qualities that make it effective protection also make it a source of constant danger, discomfort, and practical problems that affect every aspect of medieval military life. The weight that deflects sword blows also exhausts the wearer. The coverage that stops arrows also traps heat and restricts movement. The expense that demonstrates social status also creates debt that can destroy families and influence military decisions in dangerous ways. Your morning routine begins with the complex process of getting dressed in armor that requires assistance from your squire and careful attention to the proper sequence of putting on pieces that must layer correctly
to provide protection without creating gaps or pressure points that could prove fatal in combat or simply uncomfortable during long days of military service. The dressing process starts with the padded undergarments that provide essential cushioning between steel plates and human skin. The gambeson, or arming doublet, distributes the armor's weight across the body while preventing the chafing and bruising that would otherwise result from direct contact with metal plates that shift and rub with every movement. Each piece of armor has its specific challenges and compromises. The helmet provides essential head protection but restricts vision and hearing to degrees that can prove fatal in combat situations requiring spatial awareness. The gauntlets protect hands and fingers, but reduce manual dexterity to levels that make simple tasks like handling reins or weapons significantly more difficult than they would be without protection. The breastplate and backplate provide vital torso protection, but create a rigid shell that restricts breathing and makes bending or twisting movements awkward and energy-intensive. The leg armor protects against attacks from below, but adds weight to every step and makes running or climbing significantly more challenging than it would be for unarmored soldiers. Once fully armored, you face the immediate problem of mobility that affects every aspect of military activity, from mounting horses to fighting on foot. The armor's weight distribution creates fatigue that accumulates throughout the day, reducing combat effectiveness and creating strategic vulnerabilities that enemies can exploit by prolonging engagements until exhaustion compromises defensive capabilities. Heat management represents one of the armor's most dangerous aspects during summer campaigns or extended combat situations. Steel plates absorb and retain heat from sunlight and physical exertion, creating internal temperatures that can cause heat exhaustion, dehydration, and loss of consciousness that proves more dangerous than many battlefield injuries. The enclosed environment prevents normal cooling through perspiration and air circulation.
Your first military engagement of the day demonstrates armor's protective benefits when enemy arrows bounce harmlessly off your breastplate during a skirmish that would have proved fatal without steel protection. However, the same engagement reveals armor's tactical limitations when the weight and restricted mobility prevent pursuit of retreating enemies who escape because armored knights cannot match the running speed of lightly equipped infantry.
The battlefield effectiveness of armor creates tactical paradoxes that influence medieval military strategy in unexpected ways. Heavily armored knights provide superior protection and psychological impact, but require different combat approaches than faster, more maneuverable light cavalry or infantry units. The armor's protection encourages frontal assault tactics that may not be optimal for specific battlefield conditions, but represent the most effective use of expensive defensive equipment that must justify its cost through aggressive employment. Maintenance of armor represents a constant challenge that affects both military effectiveness and economic resources. Rust prevention requires daily cleaning and oiling that consumes time and materials. Damage repair from combat or normal wear requires skilled armorer services that may not be available during campaign periods when repairs are most needed. The complexity of articulated joints means that minor damage can compromise entire armor systems until proper repairs are completed. The economic burden of armor ownership extends far beyond initial purchase costs, to include ongoing maintenance, replacement, and the specialized equipment required for armor care and battlefield repair. Many knights mortgage family lands to afford quality armor, creating financial pressures that influence military service decisions and political loyalties in ways that affect broader feudal relationships and regional power structures throughout medieval society. Your afternoon training session reveals another aspect of armor's dual nature. The protection that saves lives in combat also increases training injuries when knights practice with weapons and techniques that their armor makes more dangerous to execute safely. Falls that would cause minor injuries to unarmored fighters can cause serious internal damage when the armor's weight and rigidity prevent natural protective responses and distribute impact forces in ways that cause crushing injuries despite external protection. The psychological effects of armor create both confidence and anxiety that influence combat performance in contradictory ways. The sense of protection encourages aggressive tactics and risk-taking that can improve battlefield effectiveness. However, awareness of armor's limitations and vulnerabilities creates stress about gap protection, joint failures, and the catastrophic consequences of armor damage during combat when escape or effective defense becomes impossible. The social implications of armor ownership affect medieval class structure and military organization in ways that extend beyond battlefield considerations. Only wealthy individuals can afford quality armor, creating military hierarchies based on economic rather than purely martial considerations. Knights with superior armor gain tactical advantages that reinforce social distinctions and influence promotion opportunities within military organizations that value expensive equipment as much as fighting skill or tactical knowledge. The manufacturing complexity of medieval armor requires specialized craftsmen whose skills and knowledge become strategic resources for regions and kingdoms that depend on armored cavalry for military effectiveness. Armorer guilds control technical knowledge and training that affects national military capabilities, making armor production a matter of strategic importance comparable to modern military industrial capacity and technological development programs. Regional variations in armor design reflect different tactical philosophies and environmental conditions that create advantages and disadvantages for different types of military operations. Italian armor emphasizes articulation and mobility for urban warfare and tournament competition. German armor prioritizes maximum protection for heavy cavalry charges. English armor balances protection with cost considerations that reflect different economic and military priorities based on tactical doctrines and available resources. Your evening inspection of armor damage from the day's activities reveals the ongoing deterioration that makes armor ownership a constant financial drain on knight families. Dents, scratches, and joint wear accumulate daily, requiring regular attention to prevent minor damage from progressing to major failures that could prove fatal during combat situations where equipment reliability determines survival prospects for heavily armored warriors. The weight distribution of armor creates long-term health problems for knights who wear heavy equipment regularly throughout their military careers. Joint stress, back problems, and muscle strain accumulate over years of carrying 60 pounds of steel that affects posture, gait, and skeletal development in ways that cause permanent physical changes and chronic pain that persists even after military service ends. Armor's impact on horse selection and training creates additional economic and logistical burdens that affect medieval military organizations. Thesteries capable of carrying armored knights require specialized breeding, training, and maintenance that multiply the costs associated with heavy cavalry. Armor horse adds further weight and expense, while creating additional maintenance and replacement challenges that strain military budgets and logistical systems designed to support medieval warfare's most expensive and complex military units.
The seasonal challenges of armor use reveal environmental limitations that affect campaign timing and military strategy throughout medieval Europe. Summer heat makes armor dangerous to wear during extended operations, while winter conditions create visibility problems and mobility restrictions that influence tactical decisions and operational planning that influence tactical decisions and operational planning that influence tactical decisions and operational planning. Armor-dependent military units face seasonal effectiveness variations that commanders must consider when planning campaigns and allocating resources for military operations that depend heavily on armored cavalry performance. The vulnerability paradox of armor becomes apparent during siege warfare, where protection that saves lives in open battle can become a liability in confined spaces, where mobility and agility matter more than protection from missile weapons. Armored knights face significant disadvantages in urban combat, siege assault, and defensive operations that require climbing, crawling, or rapid movement through spaces designed for unarmored defenders rather than heavily equipped attackers. Your experience with armor failures during combat demonstrates the catastrophic consequences when protective equipment malfunctions at critical moments. Strap failures can cause entire armor pieces to shift out of position, creating gaps that expose vital areas to enemy weapons. Joint seizures can trap limbs in positions that prevent effective defense. Weight redistribution from damaged components can cause loss of balance that proves fatal when fighting on unstable terrain or from horseback. The psychological dependence on armor creates tactical rigidity that can prove disadvantageous in combat situations requiring adaptability and creative problem-solving. Knights trained to fight in armor may lack the skills necessary for effective combat without full protection, creating vulnerabilities when equipment damage or loss leaves them partially protected but unable to adapt fighting techniques to compensate for reduced defensive capabilities. Medical complications from armor use include heat-related illnesses, circulation problems from constricting straps and tight-fitting plates, and infection risks from wounds that occur under armor, where cleaning and treatment become difficult without complete equipment removal. Combat wounds suffered while wearing armor often include metal fragments and contamination that complicate treatment and increase infection risks compared to similar injuries suffered by unarmored fighters with cleaner wound patterns. The technological arms race between armor and weapons creates an ongoing development cycle that drives both innovation and obsolescence in medieval military technology. Improved crossbows and longbows require thicker armor plates. Heavier armor demands stronger horses and better metallurgy. Enhanced protection increases costs and weight that eventually reach practical limits where additional armor improvement becomes counterproductive due to mobility and economic constraints that make further development unsustainable. The social signaling function of armor creates pressure for decorative elements that add cost and weight
without improving protective value. Heraldic decorations, precious metal inlays, and artistic embellishments serve important social and political functions, but compromise practical military utility by adding features that create maintenance challenges and battlefield vulnerabilities while increasing replacement costs for equipment that serves ceremonial as well as military functions within medieval aristocratic society. The training requirements for effective armor use consume significant time and resources that might otherwise be devoted to weapon skills or tactical education. Learning to move, fight, and survive in armor requires specialized instruction and extended practice that creates opportunity costs for other aspects of military education and skill development that contribute to overall combat effectiveness beyond simple protection from enemy weapons. The logistical complexity of supporting armored units affects military organization and campaign planning in ways that extend beyond individual equipment considerations to include supply chains, transport requirements, and specialized personnel needed for maintenance and repair of complex mechanical systems that require constant attention to remain militarily effective throughout extended campaign operations. As your day in armor concludes with the complex removal process that requires assistance and careful handling to prevent damage to expensive equipment, the full scope of armor's dual nature becomes clear. Protection that saves lives while creating new dangers, status symbols that bankrupt families, and military advantages that come with tactical limitations and strategic vulnerabilities that affect every aspect of medieval military service. The physical relief of armor removal provides temporary respite from the weight, heat, and restriction that define armored military service, but also creates psychological anxiety about vulnerability to attack during the hours when protection is removed for maintenance, rest, and the basic human activities that armor make impossible or impractical despite their necessity for long-term health and survival.
Your reflection on the day's experiences with armor's benefits and burdens reveals the fundamental paradox of medieval military technology: solutions that solve immediate tactical problems while creating new strategic challenges that require additional solutions in an endless cycle of technological development and adaptation that drives military innovation while never completely resolving the underlying tensions between protection and mobility, cost and effectiveness. The legacy of medieval armor extends beyond its immediate military applications to influence broader technological development and engineering principles that address the fundamental challenges of creating protective systems that enhance rather than compromise human capabilities. The lessons learned from armor's successes and failures contribute to ongoing efforts to develop personal protection that maximizes benefits while minimizing the inevitable trade-offs that accompany technological solutions to complex human problems requiring balanced approaches. Modern parallels to medieval armor's dual nature appear throughout contemporary technology, where protective systems and safety equipment create new risks while addressing existing dangers. The medieval experience with armor provides historical perspective on the continuing challenge of developing technologies that improve human capabilities without creating unacceptable disadvantages or unintended consequences that compromise the benefits they were designed to provide.
As medieval night falls over castles and military camps where armored knights rest from the daily burden of wearing protection that defines their military role and social identity, the enduring questions about technological solutions and their consequences remain relevant for understanding how human societies adapt to and cope with innovations that promise improvement while creating new challenges that require ongoing adjustment and creative problem solving. The medieval armor experience demonstrates that technological advancement involves complex trade-offs that cannot be easily resolved through further technological development alone, but require social, economic, and tactical adaptations that address the full range of consequences that emerge from adopting new technologies for military and civilian applications that affect entire societies and their organizational structures. Tonight, as medieval knights rest without their steel carapaces, you can appreciate both the courage required to fight while encased in metal protection and the wisdom necessary to recognize that even the best technological solutions come with their own inherent problems that must be acknowledged and addressed rather than ignored or wished away through further technological development that may simply create new complications. The gentle medieval evening provides respite from the weight of armor and the weight of decisions about technological dependence that continue to challenge human societies seeking better ways to protect themselves while maintaining the freedom and flexibility necessary for effective action in complex and changing environments where no single solution provides perfect answers to multifaceted problems. And in the peaceful medieval night where armor rests on stands like empty shells of human ambition and engineering compromise, we can rest knowing that the eternal human struggle to balance protection with freedom continues through each generation's efforts to develop better solutions while learning from the experiences of those who discovered that even the most sophisticated technology comes with its own costs that must be carefully weighed against benefits that may prove less straightforward than initially anticipated. The eternal questions about technological solutions and their consequences remain relevant for modern readers who face similar decisions about adopting protective systems and safety technologies that promise security while potentially compromising other values and capabilities that contribute to human flourishing and effectiveness in complex environments where multiple competing priorities require balanced approaches rather than single-minded technological solutions. Tonight, as both medieval and modern minds contemplate the relationship between protection and freedom, safety and mobility, the knight holds gentle wisdom about the importance of recognizing that technological solutions create new problems while solving old ones, and that human wisdom lies in learning to live with these trade-offs rather than seeking perfect solutions that eliminate all risks and complications from the complex business of human existence. And as peaceful sleep comes to both armored knights and those who study their legacy, the quiet darkness preserves the ancient understanding that protection and vulnerability, strength and limitation, blessing and curse remain forever intertwined in the ongoing human story of technological development and adaptation that continues through each generation's efforts to find better ways of living safely and effectively in a world that offers no perfect solutions, only better and worse compromises that require wisdom to navigate successfully.